So how you open a book sets a theme. We just started with the Gospel of Matthew in our Sunday school class, and how Matthew opens his gospel when he's writing that begins a theme for the rest of the story. The opening line even can make all the difference. Call me Ishmael. It was a dark and stormy night. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And many translations of Genesis 1 read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Period. It sounds like creation is something in the past that God is finished with. But I believe the Hebrew reads better, when God began to create. Creation is ongoing. It can be read either way. I just prefer when God began to create. Because God is still creating. And we see it all around us. The creation isn't finished. It's ongoing. And when God began to create the sky and the land, the Hebrew word we often read, the heavens and the earth, well, the heavens is the Hebrew word for the sky above us. And the earth doesn't mean the globe or a whole world. It means earth that we stand on. So when God began to create the sky and the earth was formless, chaos. Genesis does it, and it was empty. The two problems with the creation was it was chaotic, formlessness, and it was empty. And God will solve those two problems with the creation. Genesis doesn't say God created out of nothing. It starts with what's there. And what's there is deep waters and formless chaos, and it's empty. And the interesting thing about chaos and void or emptiness is that the Hebrew words rhyme. This is poetry. This is beautiful poetry, probably written about the time that the Israelites were in exile in Babylon. And chaos and void come from the Hebrew words tovu and vohu. Tovu and vohu. Chaos that's also empty. Those are the building blocks that God works with. Unordered, uninhabited nothingness, no purpose, no order, is what we experience without God's action. And then the poet writes the same thing in a new way. Darkness covered the deep waters. Again, with poetry, you often have a doublet where you just say the same thing in a different way. And people in the ancient Near East didn't know about sailing the waters. They lived on the land. Waters were chaotic, fearful, dark, and deep. There where the sea monsters dwelt. And darkness and deep, watery chaos is like floodwater over everything. It describes disorder and nothingness in an incredible way. But even those dark waters have God's Spirit. The Hebrew word is ruah, which means breath or spirit. God's breath hovers over those dark waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. One of the things that we notice in this creation is that God doesn't destroy anything in creation. Darkness is already there. God doesn't destroy darkness. God adds light to the darkness, calls the light day and the darkness night. So yesterday, I found some creative people that teach the Bible with visuals, and I hope you can see the visuals from where you're sitting. So let's listen to how they talk about the 6 days of creation.
Series of 6 days.
Each day begins with the phrase, and God said, and then ends with the phrase, and there was evening and morning.
Yeah, every day addresses those problems introduced in verse 2, that there's no order and no inhabitants. So on days 1 through 3, God splits apart that unordered darkness into 3 ordered realms. Then, on days 4 through 6, God fills the uninhabited wasteland with creatures.
Interesting. Let's see how that works.
Okay, so the first realm of order begins with light on day 1.
Ah, yes. Let there be light.
This is God's own glorious light that fills and contains the darkness as he separates day from night. God's establishing the order of time.
Okay, and then on day 2, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. What's the vault?
In the ancient culture of the biblical authors, the sky was perceived as a solid dome that holds back waters. God's depicted here as splitting the chaos waters in half, above and below, which creates the realms of the sky and the seas.
And then on day 3, let the waters under the sky be gathered into one place and let dry ground appear.
God is establishing the realm of the land, and it emerges out of the chaotic waters. And then there's a bonus creative act on day 3. God invites plants and fruit trees with seed to emerge out of the land.
Okay, so we got the realms of time, the realm of the sky and the seas, and the land. And they all have order.
Right. Now, it's time to go back and fill these realms of days 1 through 3 with inhabitants. This is what happens on days 4 through 6.
So on day 4, let there be lights in the vaults of the sky.
God installs these lights, the sun, moon, and stars, as signs and symbols that reflect God's own light. He gives them his own royal power to separate day and night.
Then on day 5, let the waters swarm with living creatures, and let birds fly above the land.
Yeah, these are the creatures that live in the waters below, and those that fly near the waters above.
Then finally on day 6, let the land produce the living creatures.
They emerge up out of the ground to live on the land. And then, matching that bonus act of creation on day 3, God makes a special land creature, human, or in Hebrew, Adam. Then, God provides all of those plants from day 3.
As food to eat. Had you ever thought of that before? Of that creation being, first of all, bringing order to light and dark, and then an order to this watery chaos with this dome over the earth. In my Bible growing up, it was firmament. I guess that was King James. Did y'all remember firmament? The firmament literally is a dome. In fact, it kind of means a colander dome that God just puts up to pull back the waters from above. And in fact, like a colander, there are holes in the dome. That's where rain comes down. And so if you open the colander holes, rain falls in this image, in this poetic image of the way the creation is. And in fact, in the story of Noah, in Noah, it says God removed this dome and the waters just came back over the earth. So that's the dome there. And then the third day, God separates the waters below by bringing up land and adds a third thing to it, and that's plants with seeds. And then up here, the lights are the sun, moon, and stars to fill this chaos. Remember, it was chaos and empty. So he fills it with sun, moon, and stars. And these tells us the seasons. The sun tells us the day and night. And then the moon tells us the monthly seasons, and almost all the Jewish festivals are built around the moon. And the stars tell us the annual seasons of fall, winter, spring, summer, as we have those seasons because of the stars. So God marks time with this. And then the sea and the land, here the land's brought up, the sea's brought down, and the sea and the air from the firmament, not land yet, sea and air from firmament come with the creatures, fills it with air in the air and in the land, in the waters. And then finally, when God brings up the earth, fills it with all the animals and human beings last. And human beings Friday afternoon. And so And so that gives us that. And I love that kind of symmetry of the imagery. The other thing I love about this poetry is that plants and fruits, it repeats seeds of plants and fruits. Even our plants and fruits are co-creators with God. God initiates the creation, but then God says, keep creating, you plants and you fruit. Keep creating. Creation is ongoing because of the seeds that are contained in the plants and the fruit. And when God gets to human beings and animals, the creation again keeps going. When God says to the animals and to the humans, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And so that's all continuing the creation. God initiates, but we're in partnership with God. And in the rest of the Bible, God will initiate something, but need us to be partners with God. That's what Jesus preaches when he preaches the kingdom of God. It's a partnership with God. And then that phrase, imagio Dei, the image of God. God created human beings in God's image. Male and female together make up the image of God. And the image of God are to represent God in the world. And we represent God in the world the way God creates, by inviting, by caring for, by encouraging more and more life. God says to the human beings, be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over the earth. And some people read that as have dominance over the earth. Use up the earth any way you want to. But that's not what it means. It means have dominion means have care for. You're in charge of the earth in my image. And you're in charge of caring for the earth the way I did. I didn't say, I didn't make it. I invited it. Let there be light. Let there be trees. It's an invitation. Be invitational with the earth. Be caring for the earth. Allow the earth to prosper and grow. In this little bit that we have between the watery chaos below and the watery chaos above, we have this little bitty space to breathe and live and grow and flourish. And God's with us in that space. And we're created in the image of God to represent God in that space. Some people wonder if human beings is the pinnacle of creation. And one of the questions that I ask is, are we the pinnacle? Are we the end? God calls it very good at the end. He calls it good on these other days 6 times. But here he says very good. He has to call it good twice on this day, because when he does the firmament, he doesn't create anything, just puts the firmament in. That's not a good day. I mean, it's not listed as a good day. So it's good here. And then it's very good here. Maybe because human beings are the pinnacle of creation. Maybe because he looks at all the creation with us part of it in this. And so that's one. And so I ask, are human beings the pinnacle of creation, or is the Sabbath the pinnacle of creation? Is it the goal for humans or the goal for the Sabbath? Here we have on the 6th day, God, this beautiful mosaic from the 1200s. On the front of your bulletins is the St. Church's mosaic of the Sabbath, where I'm afraid God looks a little bit bored on the Sabbath sitting there. But anyway, I'm not sure if he is, but that's that mosaic. This day of creation, the 6th day, remember that God creates the animals and creates the human in God's image in one day. Isn't that a beautiful depiction of creating the same? But as my friend and teacher Dom Crossan says, human beings are created Friday afternoon. Who does their best work on Friday afternoon? Now you know a little bit about Dom's humor. But after that, we get the day of rest. And the day of rest, when God stops and rests, we get this beginning of the Sabbath. It doesn't call it the Sabbath yet. It won't call it the Sabbath till in Exodus. And in the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath is one of the commandments. It's in two different versions of the commandments. You know, when people want to put the Ten Commandments in schools, they put it's about 30% of the commandments. Isn't even the whole Ten Commandments. About 30% they want to put in schools. And I question, which set do you choose from? Because we have a different one in Exodus from Deuteronomy of the Ten Commandments. And on Sabbath Eve, on Friday night, as they begin their Sabbath, the woman of the house lights 2 candles for the Sabbath because there are 2 reasons for the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy is how Exodus puts it. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. And then listen to who's included. You, your son or your daughter, your male or your female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. Everyone who lives among you is to be given that day of rest. Sabbath is an incredible equalizer of the whole creation. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. That's Exodus. And Exodus' reason for observing the Sabbath is the creation. Sabbath is a part of the whole creation. In fact, it's the pinnacle of creation. And Sabbath is built in to God's creation of the world. In 6 days, God created the world and rested on the Sabbath day. But Deuteronomy 5 has a different set of 10 commandments, a little bit different, and mostly because of why we have the Sabbath. Observe, not keep, but observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall do your whole work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, or your male or female slave. And now they add in, or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the resident alien in your towns, the immigrants, all equal. So that male and female slave, and they add female slave now, may rest as well as you. And then they give the reason. Exodus was because of the creation. The reason for the Sabbath in Deuteronomy is, remember, you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. You were a slave in a country that only was interested in using you for production and killing you off to produce more and more with fewer and fewer. As slaves in Egypt, God rescued you from that world of production and consumption and inequality and gave you freedom and a Sabbath for all, the equality. And furthermore, for them, the Sabbath is not just a day. The Sabbath is also, there's the Sabbath year. You have 7 days and the Sabbath. You have 7 years and the Sabbath. And the first thing that happens in the 7th year is all debts are canceled that 7th year. You know, God knows that we'll sometimes run into trouble and get into debt because our fields don't produce well. And so we have to borrow to get through to the next growing season. But rather than be in debt the rest of our lives, or from generation to generation, or from country to country, the greatest reason for hunger in the world is debt from small nations. God says, let's just start over. Every 7 years, whatever debts you have are canceled. And so that is the debts. Every 7th year, you shall grant a remission of debts. This is the manner of the remission. Every creditor shall remit the claim that is held against a neighbor, not exacting it of a neighbor who is the member of the community, because the Lord's remission has been proclaimed. So Sabbath year meant a remission of debts. And Sabbath year also meant slaves are set free. They didn't have slaves as part of they didn't grab as many slaves as we did from Africa. Slaves usually were because of debt. You had to work off your debts as a slave. But every 7 years, if you were forced into slavery because you had bad fields or bad economy, then you were free every 7 years. When you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. But in the 7th, he shall go as a free person without debt. In Exodus. And in Deuteronomy, if a member of your community, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and works for you 6 years, in the 7th year, you shall set that person free. That kind of distributive economic justice of the Sabbath. And in the Sabbath year, the land rests. Not just people, the land rests. And it wasn't just good agriculture, it was to give the land a break, to let the land rest. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in their yield. But in the 7th year, you shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land. You may eat what the land yields during Good Sabbath. You, your male and female slaves, your hired and your bound laborers who live with you, for your livestock also, and the wild animals in your land, all can eat what it yields, but you won't plant on the Sabbath year. Let it rest. And as opposed to God's justice, distributive justice of the Sabbath, might be best understood with Leviticus. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity. You don't sell land forever and ever. The land is mine, says the Lord, and you are aliens and tenants. That's what the creation story tells us. The land is God's. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. We're just to care for the land in the name of God. And so one way we have God's distributive justice of the Sabbath is not to hold land from generation to generation where people just get richer and richer over generations. It's to allow for a fresh start. And the manna in the wilderness gives us that demonstration. And it's the first time the word Sabbath is used. The 7th day in creation is when God rests. They call it the Sabbath when they received manna. And what was manna? In the manna you gathered 1 omer, about 3.5 pounds of manna per person. It was exactly as much as was needed for one person. And if you gathered more, if you tried to hoard some and take some more than was what you needed, the bread got worms and became foul. You couldn't take more. You only took what is needed. But on the Sabbath day, the first time the Sabbath's mentioned in the Bible, on the Sabbath day, you take a 2-day supply of manna, and it lasts 2 days. Otherwise, it only lasts 1 day. And you get what you need for the day. Jesus teaches us in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Give us, the whole earth, what each of us needs for 1 day to survive. An example of our injustice that's throughout the Bible is our injustice from Isaiah. You take your land and you join house to house. You add field to field until there's room for no one but you. And you are left to live alone in the midst of the land. That call from God about human injustice is that we sometimes just take more and don't make room for anybody else. Add to our house, add to our land, till there's nothing more. Jesus tells a parable about a man who built bigger barns. And the injustice shakes the foundations of the earth. Injustice shakes the very foundations of the earth. Because God establishes the 7th day of rest for justice for the whole world in the very creation. And again, my teacher, John Dominic Crossan, says, The Sabbath vision of distributive justice is not just a rest for us from the world, but a rest of the world from us. Because we human beings and our civilizations have a way of hoarding and grabbing and taking more and more, of having, like the Egyptian pyramids, a few at the top having 99% more than what the many at the bottom have. And so that is God's vision of justice in the Sabbath. And I think it's at the very beginning of creation. So let's go back to our video and see how they ended.
Line that links back to the key words of the opening line.
And so were completed the skies and the land and all their inhabitants.
Except there's one more day. It stands outside the pattern of days 1 through 6. It's the big climax.
And God completed on the seventh day the work which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and set it apart as holy.
So God rests on the seventh day. This is a standard biblical image where God, after ordering the cosmos, comes to rest and dwell in his sacred space. It's like the whole world is a holy temple where God lives with his people.
Now that phrase, there was evening and morning, it doesn't appear on day 7.
That's right. The seventh day has no end. That's because Genesis 1 is describing God's ideal vision for the whole cosmos.
A place where God lives with his partners to rule the world in harmony forever.
Yes, the seventh day is the goal of creation. It's actually so important that the author of Genesis 1 has woven the number 7 into every part of the story. There are 7 days of creation, 7 announcements that creation is good. There are 7 Hebrew words in the opening verse, and then 2 times 7 Hebrew words in verse 2. And then the statement about the seventh day has 3 lines of 7 words.
Wow. So the first page of the Bible is doing way more than just telling us how the world was made.
Right. Genesis 1 has been designed to show us that God's purpose is to share creation with his images so they can rest and rule it with him forever. And that purpose is what the rest of the biblical drama is all about.
I didn't know about the 7 words in the opening line. And the next 2 lines are 7 words each. And when it talks about the Sabbath day, it's 3 different lines, 7 words each. And 7 days of creation. No wonder 7 is a holy number for the people of Israel. So that's the creation. That's how the Bible begins the story. In the beginning, when God began creating the heavens and the earth. And the rest of the story is how we can not live in harmony with God and creation, and how God keeps inviting us to be partners with God to live in harmony with God and creation, with equal rest for the whole of creation, for immigrants and outsiders, for slaves and free, for male and female, all together with the animals and the birds of the air and the trees in creation. A time of peace and rest with God as our Lord. Next week, we'll talk about the first time the word sin is mentioned in the Bible. It's not Adam and Eve. It's Cain and Abel. So next week, we'll look at Genesis 4, the story of Cain and Abel.